New Yorkers are required to be indoors tonight at 8 p.m. after last night's riots stormed through the city and caused widespread destruction. But the city's mayor says the National Guard is still not needed.
Last night, more than 700 New Yorkers were arrested. Times Square was torn up. Over a dozen stores in Soho were looted. During the Soho looting, a man was reportedly shot. He was sent to Bellevue Hospital, and media reports say he is in stable condition. In upstate New York, a 24-year-old woman was attacked, trying to stop a group of looters from destroying a business.
In terms of who's instigating, we see a pattern all over the country.
And I know people who are protesting, among them few of my students in Brooklyn, and they're very peaceful. I mean, it's not the intention to destroy the city they live in, by no means. Those are people who are coming from the outside, Antifa.
The mayor is relying on local law enforcement to stop the violence. In his words, it's too dangerous to deploy the National Guard.
The National Guard should not be brought here. We have 36,000 police officers. They are the best equipped to deal with this situation.
But the governor does not think de Blasio is doing enough to stop the violence.
Look at the videos. It was a disgrace. I believe the mayor underestimates the scope of the problem.
It's up to the local government to call in the Guard if needed. Trump said he will send them wherever they're called for, and he urged New York City particularly to do so. Businesses are boarding up their windows to prepare for the next night of riots. While New York City is just 6 days away from reopening, these stores are now facing an even harder lockdown. Once locked on the inside to protect the public from the virus, now boarded up on the outside to protect from nightly riots. Workers are being sent home early, and New Yorkers say they're ready for violence to end soon. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News, New York.
Many protesters and residents in New York City say the violence is only creating more division. Some protesters say people who were not part of the protests started the riots and looting. And some residents are helping business owners board up their windows to protect their shops. Our reporter Kevin Hogan has more.
Peaceful protesters have demonstrated in New York City over the last several days to stand up to injustice over the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis police custody. A protester told NTD people who are not part of the protests are rioting and looting.
A lot of things, a lot of riots, a lot of looting was started by people who weren't even trying to do the protests. I think a lot of people just took advantage of the situation and try to just loot and just do whatever they want with no consequences. Tonight is more peaceful. I mean, they asked for NYPD to take a knee. 2 officers took a knee, and a few people started throwing stuff at them, and we immediately stopped it. We don't want to escalate the situation. We need our voice heard.
A resident in Lower Manhattan says this kind of violence is not normal. She says she wouldn't be surprised if there was some outside influence involved, even possibly from a foreign country.
People are trying to divide us even more. This is just more a divisive issue. I think that's what's coming from it.
A man that lives above a small shop came down to board up the windows to protect it. He says there is not enough police to stop the looting. He's against the violence that happened to Floyd, and he says violent protests are not the way to stand up to it.
I understand that violence. You know, I want to protest also, but this is not the way to win hearts and sympathy.
The protester mentioned that black parents often have to coach their children on how to interact with the police, a problem that not as many white families have to deal with. Around 3,000 protesters marched to Brooklyn's Barclays Center on Sunday night. Kevin Hogan, NTD News, New York.
The president is focusing his attention on faith. He signed an executive order today approving $50 million in federal funding for programs that help advance international religious freedom.
New action on religious freedom has been approved by the White House. President Trump authorized an executive order Tuesday afternoon, one centered on religious freedom. The signing came hours after the president and First Lady took a trip to the John Paul II National Shrine in Washington. There, they laid a ceremonial wreath to mark the 100th anniversary of St. John Paul II's birth. Their visit was a quiet one compared to Trump's appearance at the historic St. John's Episcopal Church on Monday. Crowds protesting the death of George Floyd and some members of the church's clergy were reportedly cleared from the area with tear gas. Soon after, the president held a Bible out front, a move criticized by some religious leaders.
And in other news, we've heard a lot about forced lockdowns across the nation, but not so much about the small number of states that left the decision up to the people. One economic policy expert from South Dakota is calling them the FireFree States, and he points out the one thing these states have in common.
Most U.S. states ordered residents to close businesses and stay home, but some states didn't. North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, and Arkansas. What do they all have in common?
But they also all share this deep, religious sensibility.
South Dakota's governor has repeatedly said she aims to keep power in the hands of the people. Economic policy expert and South Dakota resident Robert Wright says normal life wasn't severely disturbed there like in other states. He says it's most likely because of residents' strong spiritual foundation.
We were all kind of surprised at the policy decisions being made in most other states because, the virus is, in a sense, an act of God. Natural death out here is not feared.
Saying that while they believe people shouldn't be reckless,
it's just common sense mitigation rather than a government saying, no, none of you can do this under any circumstances.
In South Dakota specifically, any businesses that want to open have been allowed to since late April. And still, the hospitalization and death rates there haven't been any worse than the states that locked down completely. He says times like these call on people's wisdom to recognize the difference between what they can change and what they can't. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
People in 8 states are voting in primaries in person and by mail. Some see it as a test of what voting might look like come the general election this November.
8 states plus Washington, D.C. are holding primary elections. It's the biggest test yet of officials' readiness to manage a surge of mail-in ballots and the safety risks of in-person voting during virus-related lockdowns. It's the largest day of voting since the pandemic began. It will serve as a dry run for the November 3rd general election and offers a glimpse of the challenges ahead on a national scale. But the voting could be complicated in some areas by George Floyd protests. Philadelphia's mayor said a city curfew would not be enforced until 30 minutes after polls close. Voters and poll workers in Washington, D.C. will be exempt from that city's curfew. 4 states already delayed their primaries from earlier in the year. Other states encouraged or expanded mail-in voting. That led to record numbers of mail-in ballots in many states, along with an explosion of questions, confusion, and reports of delayed or lost ballot applications. Most states will sharply reduce the number of in-person polling places as officials struggle to recruit workers. Officials say the time it takes to count the flood of mail-in ballots could delay the election results. The primaries bring with them a partisan brawl over voting by mail. Some see it as a safe way to cast their vote, but others, including President Trump, see it as ripe for fraud.
The U.S. is launching an investigation into whether other countries are unfairly taxing American tech companies. Several European countries are considering digital taxes on Google and Facebook's local businesses. It could mean new tariffs for America's trading partners.
The Office of U.S. Trade Representatives said on Tuesday it will investigate a number of America's trading partners. The USTR wants to review how other countries are taxing U.S. tech companies. The move could mean new tariffs. The USTR chief says the president is concerned that many trading partners are using tax schemes that are unfair to American companies. He also says it will defend American businesses and workers against any such discrimination. The Section 301 probe is the same type of investigation that Trump launched into China's technology and IP transfer practices nearly 2 years ago. The USTR said this investigation would cover digital taxes in the EU, Britain, India, and a handful of other countries. It requested meetings with these governments. The trade agency says the probe would first focus on whether U.S. companies are being taxed unfairly and if the taxes differ from international norms. Differences may include taxing revenue instead of profit or penalizing specific tech companies for their financial successes. Several European countries are currently considering digital taxes on American companies like Facebook and Google.
Up next, the final results are in after Wuhan's initiative to test all of its residents. The results may surprise you. More on that when we return.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format, where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
The final results are in after Wuhan's initiative to test all of its residents. The results may surprise you. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
Last week, we reported on Wuhan's initiative to test every one of its residents. 2/3 of the 9 million samples collected were tested, and the result was no confirmed cases. Now, all 9 million samples have been tested. Authorities say the final result is still no confirmed cases, but 300 asymptomatic cases were found. In China, asymptomatic cases are not included in confirmed cases.
没有发现确诊病例。
They said these 300 asymptomatic cases aren't contagious and haven't infected other people.
没有发现无症状感染者传染他人的情况。
Chinese netizens have different opinions. 2 netizens discussed about the accuracy of the Chinese regime's figures. One netizen says he believes the figures because he knows hundreds of people in China and none of them are infected. Another responded that he doesn't want to discuss anymore because he doesn't have time to wake someone up who pretends to be asleep. The U.S. Department of State will hold an online candlelight vigil on June 3rd for the victims of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. According to VOA, Bo Miller, a Chinese affairs officer from U.S. Department of State, invited all participants to record a short video, holding candles and talking about how the 1989 Tiananmen Square protesters inspired them, and upload this video on social media using the tag Tiananmen Square Vigil. The message went viral on social media. Many Hong Kongers say the U.S. is taking action to defeat the CCP and told everyone to join. Organizations, religious groups, individuals, and media from New York, Los Angeles, and Hong Kong are also holding commemorations of different forms and sharing this message with the world. African authorities issued a notice saying 268 nationals have been evacuated from China amid virus concerns and alleged racial discrimination. Nigeria's foreign minister said the evacuees endured a difficult time in China and are now settled in hotels where they will be quarantined for 14 days. Nigerians and other Africans are reportedly facing racial discrimination in China, especially in the south. This includes being barred from shopping malls, hospitals, and even their homes, as well as facing violence in the streets.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi signed a bill Tuesday that toughens the U.S. response to China's brutal crackdown on ethnic minorities. It sends a clear message to China of U.S. support, hoping to push Beijing on human rights.
Over the years, there has been a real commitment to shining a bright light on human rights violations in China and to say to those who are affected by that, you are not alone.
The House and Senate passed the bipartisan bill. It would impose sanctions on Chinese officials involved in the mass surveillance and detention of Uyghurs and other ethnic groups in the western Xinjiang region.
This is a genocide. More than 1 million people are in concentration camps. Millions more are harassed every single day.
The measure now needs a signature from President Donald Trump. The president says he'll very strongly consider it. U.S.-China tensions are high over the Chinese regime's handling of the CCP virus outbreak and Beijing's plan to restrict civil liberties in Hong Kong.
The UK's Foreign Secretary today saying Britain has a duty to the people of Hong Kong. Beijing is increasingly drawing Hong Kong into its orbit, and there's more pressure on the UK and the world to act. Our UK correspondent Jane Werrell reports from London.
British joint declaration.
The UK Foreign Secretary speaking in Parliament saying the UK will stand by the people of Hong Kong if China follows through with what it calls a new national security law.
And Mr. Speaker, I hope the whole House agrees that we as the United Kingdom have historic responsibilities, a duty, I would say, to the people of Hong Kong.
If Beijing follows through with its repressive law in Hong Kong, the UK says it will extend visa rights to some Hong Kongers who have a BNO passport. It would mean they will be able to study and work in the UK for up to 12 months. Anyone who was born before 1997 in Hong Kong is eligible for one. That's about 3 million Hong Kongers. But many say more needs to be done, like the last governor of Hong Kong, Chris Patten, who spoke online on Tuesday during a House of Lords debate.
I welcome what the government have said about passports, but there is a lot more to do to demonstrate our legal and moral obligations to what was, of course, a British colonial territory.
He led an effort of what's now 787 politicians and policymakers in 38 countries who called out Beijing's move, describing it as a flagrant breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration.
I think every democratic nation would see this as being a huge step backwards. I think it's very important now that all democratic states who are critical of these actions stand together and put pressure on China to back off.
The new law is a mortal blow to the city's freedoms, and an increasing number of politicians are pushing for a global response. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
Coming up, Paris residents emerge from their homes as lockdown measures ease. Hear from some of them on what it's like to be back outside after the break.
Hello there. Doesn't it feel like we're moving further away from the very values that our republic was built upon? And the media in our country have just been adding fuel to the flame, which is why you need to try The Epoch Times. It's pure, honest journalism that's restoring traditional values and reports the news with no spin, no hidden agendas, and no false narratives. So if you want to know the truth about the FISA abuse that took place during the 2016 election, or how socialist and communist ideologies have been infiltrating our society, or how the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up led to this global pandemic, and so much more, then you need to try The Epoch Times. And for a limited time, you can try the paper yourself for a full month for just a single $1, and we'll send you a very special gift. A 58-page magazine that investigates the truth behind the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up of the virus. So go to readepoch.com, try The Epoch Times, get your free gift, and stay truly informed.
Life is back on the streets of Paris as lockdown measures were further eased in France today. Our France correspondent David Vives has the story.
Everyone out. This is the phrase millions of French have been waiting to say as parks, cafes, and restaurants reopen after weeks of lockdown. In the Butte-Chaumont Park, walkers mix with joggers and people practicing Qigong.
It's great. It's just great. To practice exercise, to practice Qigong, and outside it's like, wow, life again,
In Luxembourg Park, which opened this weekend, the crowds were huge and the little boats were sailing.
I have a balcony, but it was really frustrating for me to stay home for 2 months. Now I find nature again. That's extraordinary. We need to see life around us.
The streets also welcomed life again. with the opening of the places inescapable for most Parisians, cafes. Parisians enjoyed their morning ritual of coffee and croissants.
In Paris, cafes and restaurants are only allowed to have customers on terraces. In some areas, the city hall has closed streets to car, allowing restaurants to welcome more customers.
That's the case for this cafe at Bastille that has a large terrace. After 2 months of lockdown, Anthony Rodriguez was back to work this morning.
We had to wake up at 6 this morning. It was a bit complicated, but we're happy to be here.
With some adjustments made regarding social distancing and hygiene measures.
Tables must be 4 feet away from one another in length and width. We will print disposable menus for the customers.
Lockdown measures will be eased further in France on June 22nd. Following the French government's timeline, this is the date when all shops will be able to fully reopen to the public. Reporting by David Vivez, NTD News, Paris.
Stocks rise despite protests. Low demand from rental companies hurts car makers, and more in business news.
Stocks rose on the prospect of the country reopening, offsetting worries about the nationwide protests. Crude oil prices also rose to more than $36 a barrel, hitting a 3-month high. Economic data from a U.S. manufacturing index shows its first upturn since January. The collapse of air travel pushed big car rental companies to cancel orders for new vehicles, punching a hole in sales for nearly a dozen U.S. automakers. That includes the big three in Detroit. Automakers could lose up to 12% of their annual U.S. vehicle sales in 2020. The Food and Drug Administration plans to allow more companies to make hand sanitizer. The FDA says it will expand the kinds of companies allowed to make the product. That's because the demand for sanitizer is outpacing the supply during the pandemic. The European Commission is trying to change the way drugs are made. This is an effort to prevent shortages and improve drug distribution. People are recognizing flaws in the healthcare system and the EU's dependency on foreign supplies, mostly from China. The EU has long experienced drug shortages. The pandemic only made things worse.
Coming up, people in the Netherlands are dining inside mini greenhouses to maintain social distance as the country slowly recovers from the pandemic. Find out more on the creative solution when we return.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people. I'm a little freaked out that that many people have seen my face. In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
A restaurant in the Netherlands is taking precautions that are downright beautiful as the country eases its lockdown restrictions. It's providing its customers in greenhouse dining. Each table is inside a small glass house so people can maintain social distance.
In many parts of the world, the virus pandemic has reached its peak and is now finally beginning to dwindle. But some are saying we aren't out of the woods yet. This restaurant in Amsterdam is playing it safe by using these small greenhouses. They were originally meant for plant-based art projects.
It's only that Corona forces us to think again and say like, hey, maybe it's also nice for humans to sit in.
The greenhouses help keep social distance by separating the customers from those who aren't dining with them. Waitresses bring the food to them by using a long wooden plank. Some diners said it's a nice experiment, but they miss the social interaction. Other diners notice a twist of irony to this new element of the dining experience.
And it's really odd to see that we are in a greenhouse and the food is prepared from the vegetables that are grown in their backyard. So it's the other way around, you see?
The restaurant's owner says that one good thing to come out of the pandemic is that people are being creative and trying new things.
And that's all for now. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.